Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Thank you once again for joining me on this little podcast that we have going on here. Before I get into today's topic, I just want to ask you a huge favor, as I do each and every week. Please make sure that you are like and subscribe the podcast on whatever platform that you're listening to this on. So whether that be Spotify, Apple, Google, we're on all the podcast platforms. You can also follow along on Facebook and Instagram as well as YouTube. So it's at The Unstoppable Dad on Instagram, The Unstoppable Dad Project on Facebook. While you're there on Facebook, you can add yourself into our free group that we have going on there. There is a free 8-week program in there for anyone to use around training, breakdown videos, instructional videos, all there attached. It is 100% free. You can jump on there, ask questions, and then just get involved with the group. So this week, I want to talk about the title of the episode is Plan for the Worst, but Expect the Best. And I've done a podcast on this not that long ago. I think it was about 12 episodes ago, where I basically spoke about making sure you have a plan B, C, and D up your sleeve just in case plan A doesn't work. Because for the most part, whenever we're trying to implement any sort of change, plan A isn't always going to go exactly according to plan. And I just wanted to go into that a little bit more because over the last couple of weeks, I've been putting together some training and some modules just around goal setting and effective goal setting and also efficient goal setting, something that you can put in place for yourself moving forward so that you can reassess your goals on a 3-month, 6-month, 12-month basis, whether that be around health, whether that be around finances, whether that be around just whatever it is, just some structure and some framework in order to do it that I'll be putting into the groups, and I'll also be releasing in probably more in depth through our paid programs. But through going through this and doing a lot of learning, listening to a lot of different people around the structure of goal setting, one thing has become abundantly clear, and it's really around making sure that you are having a think about things that can possibly go wrong. Now, as parents, when we are trying to, let's take something that I deal with a lot of people on, which is trying to implement some form of fitness regime or some form of workout into your life. And for a lot of people, what happens is we've done something in our previous life when we didn't have kids. All of a sudden, kids come along, and we still want to be able to maintain a good base level of health and athleticism, so that I'm going to use a line that when I was speaking to somebody yesterday, they used on a call, so that we can age gracefully and we are able to maintain a high level of activity so that we can actually enjoy the time with our kids. But when we're trying to implement that, a lot of the times people try and implement things that they have done in the past, and it doesn't work because the circumstances that they're in are very, very different now. And as a result, it a lot of the times gets put in the too hard basket until it gets to a point where it becomes, or it feels like it's a pressing issue for us and we need to address it. And then what happens is we are then forced to change our approach. We're forced to look at a different option. We're forced to go down a different path and implement it a different way than what we've maybe tried in the past. And one of the things I was listening to and I was reading into was basically around having a look at what, and really thinking about, before we set out on something, what can go wrong and how it could potentially fall apart. And one of the podcasts I was listening to around this, from a vision scientist, somebody who kind of studies goal setting and studies the way people respond to it, was they were talking about Michael Phelps. Now, I'm sure most people that listen to this podcast are probably aware who Michael Phelps is. I believe he is probably the most successful Olympian in history. He has a whole swag of gold medals to his name in swimming. And they were talking about how his coaches would basically set him up in scenarios of worst case scenario of what would happen in swimming. For example, they use the example of diving off the blocks and the goggles come off in the pool, and they would deliberately do things like place the goggles on in an incorrect manner on his head and then make him swim the race, or make him swim in training. They would like rip the goggles off his head underwater. Like they would set up all these scenarios, all these worst case scenarios, because they're thinking about what could go wrong in a race. And they would do this in practice, they would do this in training. And obviously that paid dividends, because the guy's the most successful person in Olympic history when it comes to swimming. But I use that as an example because it actually took somebody, when they were going through the planning process, we have this person who wants to become amazing at what they do. So we need to have a look at what things can potentially go wrong. And as a result, that means if we do that in a controlled environment and we do that in training, then should it happen in a competition setting, he's prepared for what's going to happen. Because the fact of the matter is, when we are under extra stress, extra strain, and we have all these other things that are going on in our life, we are not going to be able to think optimally about what needs to be done. We're not going to be able to think about how to pivot in this particular stage. So sometimes it comes down to having that planning in place and knowing, all right, this has happened. I've already thought about what I'm going to do when this happens, and then just taking action on it. Because again, we're just not going to be able to think in a controlled, measured way when we have a stressor that has come up that is putting more strain on our system, put on our body, on our mind, and putting us under undue stress. And that example, while it might not be applicable to the vast majority of people that are listening to this, because we're potentially at a time in our life where we're not thinking about doing like reaching Olympic gold medals, it's still applicable to somebody who wants to potentially look at implementing new habits into their life. And when I talk to people about doing this, and it comes up all the time, let's say, for example, we have a plan of training 3 times a week, and we haven't actually, and it gets to a Wednesday, and we haven't actually thought about how we're going to adapt the plan if something comes up, and then something comes up, and then all of a sudden it gets put in the too hard basket after that point. And that is a hard thing to go through when you haven't thought about what that plan is. So the big thing and the big message is, if you are trying to implement something new and you are in a position where you are about to start it, or you're doing it and things are going well, or maybe the wheels are falling off, remove yourself from the situation for a bit and start thinking about things that can possibly go wrong. And then start thinking about action plans that you can take if those things do come up. And I would even go as far with this as writing those down. Because then should that situation come up, you are able to just refer back to what you have written down and go, all right, this is my plan B, or this is my plan C, or this is my plan D. And you don't need to go all the way down the list and write out 12 different scenarios. I reckon 2 or 3 will be the best for most people. And it's probably going to cure, I shouldn't say cure, it's not a magic pill, but it's probably going to satisfy probably more than 2 particular situations. But think about, especially if you've tried to implement something in the past and it hasn't worked, okay, have a think about that when you're implementing it. Like, what has come up in the past that has caused me issue? Like, now how am I going to work around that? And sometimes it actually helps to go through this process with somebody else and have an outside opinion on how to implement a strategy to do that. And that doesn't necessarily even have to be like a paid coach or somebody as a coach. It can just be a friend. It could be or your wife or significant other. Like, it can be somebody who is just not you, because to have that outside opinion of like, hey, maybe you can just do this, because it's can be something that it's like, oh, I didn't even think of that. Like, having that input from somebody else is something that can be very, very helpful to help you move the needle forward and come up with alternative plans, especially if you have tried to implement something, it hasn't worked. There's going to be emotion attached to the fact that you've potentially, I'm going to use the word fail, but I don't. But if that's got a negative connotation for you, obviously don't think of it that way. Maybe you've had a false start on it. I will guarantee you, after working with so many people, that if you have tried to do something and you have not been able to achieve that goal, whether it is due to it just not being a good fit for you at the time or whatever the case might be, if you go to undertake that again and you need to think about an alternative plan and you're looking back on why that failed in the past, there is going to be some emotion around it, which means that you're potentially not going to be able to look at that situation as objectively. So having that outside opinion and having that outside input to kind of go, hey, maybe instead of trying to go through this door here, we take 2 steps to the left and we go through this door. You may not be able to think of that, but somebody else may be able to objectively look at it and give you that advice and give you that input, which may be all you need to actually kickstart it, flip the script, and start yourself moving in that direction that you want to move into. So the big thing is when you're looking at trying to implement some form of change in your life, and it doesn't matter what it is, but around if it's around your fitness, if it's around just your overall health, maybe it's around adding in extra time with your family. Have a think when you're going through the planning process and you're looking at how this is going to fit into your life. Have a think about a plan B and a plan C. And when you look at those things, add some context to that plan B and plan C around, all right, this is something that can potentially go wrong. And this is my action plan should that happen. Because by doing that, it is going to mean that when shit hits the fan and things start to get a little bit hard, you don't have to sit down and think about it. You already have that plan there. And then all you have to do is take action on the plan. And that's easier said than done. I appreciate that and I get that. But I'm a big advocate in planning. And I don't think you need to spend hours and hours on end every week to do that. I think you can get it. I have some systems and some processes that I use and I share with clients and I share with people should they need it. So if you need some help or you need maybe some resources around planning, reach out. You can book in a call to talk to me below, or just reach out via one of the social medias. Just send me a message and say, hey, Matt, can I have some of the resources or the videos that you've done on planning? I'm struggling to fit this into my life. Give me some context around what you need it for. That way I can provide you with the right information and uh, the right resource to fit that particular situation. It doesn't have to be a long and involved process, but I do think that a really, really important part of planning, especially when you're a busy person, when you have other people in your life to worry about other than yourself, when you don't have kids, you don't have a partner, and it's only you, it's easy to just change the time that you do this particular thing. If it's training, like you can, instead of, if you miss out in the morning because the kids have been up all night and they've been sick and unwell and you've slept in an extra half hour because sleep can be more important than training, which was last week's podcast episode. Go back and listen to it if you haven't. But if that happens, if you don't get a good night's sleep because you've been up partying when you're single and you miss your regular training time, you can just go later in the day. But when you've got kids, you've got a wife, and you've got other things that are important to you to do, if you miss that window in the morning, you may not be able to get it back for the later on in the day. So what's plan B if that happens? Okay, it may be to just do it the next day and slot it in. It may also be that you have like a save workout where you're just going to throw some shoes on as soon as you finish work and go for a 30-minute run or a walk or something like that. And that's going to kind of tick the box, even though it's not as the plan's not as ideal as what plan A is, it is still getting something done and it's moving you closer to your goal. These are the type of things that I think it's important to think about when you're going through a goal setting process with yourself, when you're trying to implement something new. And by having those plans in place in the early stages, it can help you be a lot more adaptable. And most importantly, it can start to move you closer to what you want to achieve overall. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully that it's something that I have covered off quite a bit every time, like over the podcast over the last 18 months. It's just probably a slightly different take or a different bit of information based off that. But when you're going through that process, when you're goal setting, doesn't matter what the goal is. I think this is important for any sort of goal. Make sure that you have a think about things that can go wrong. and then have a plan to do that and be able to implement that. And if it's from a competition standpoint, if you're looking to compete in sport, I've got this line that I don't know where I've heard it from, but I use it quite a bit with athletes that I have trained in the past. And you can paraphrase this however you want, but we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to the level of our training. So however you train is how you're going to perform. No athlete in the good athletes in history are always the ones that have a very high level of training. Like I spoke about with the Michael Phelps situation, they are putting themselves in those situations in training so that when the lights are on and the pressure is happening, they just revert back to the level of their training, which is such a high level and such a world-class level that they are able to perform at that world-class level in training. And that ties back into you are going to, if you have a plan for how it is going to take place and you have thought about this, you are going to be better able to respond to it when things don't quite go right. Whereas if you haven't thought about that, you are not going to be able to think in a clear and concise way to come up with the best plan for that particular situation. If you need help with anything, please reach out. As I said, I've got quite a few free resources that I'm more than happy to give out. So reach out on the socials, Facebook, Instagram, or if you want to book in and have a chat, there is a link in the show notes where you can book in, and you can book in a time where you can give me a little bit of context about your situation, and hopefully I can give you some resources to hopefully get yourself moving forward. So thanks for listening for another week. I appreciate each and every single one of you. Please, 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 again, make sure that you have liked and subscribed on the podcast platform that you are listening to this on so that you can get notified as soon as a new episode drops each week. So thanks very much. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Bye.